So today we're here with Francis Sims. Francis actually isn't a staff member at CBU, but he is from Cape Breton and he does have a background in education and a lot of technical knowledge as well. He's a guest commentator often on CBC, and I'd like to welcome Francis to our conversation. How are you doing?
I'm so happy to come home to CBU. I went to CBU for 2 years in I think 1991 through to 93.
Wow, the before time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
before time.
Yeah. There's been a lot of changes here since then.
Yeah.
So maybe you could just give us a little bit of a background on your career since having attended CBU, and that might enlighten people as to why you've come in today to give us some perspective on artificial intelligence.
Yeah, so I graduated from Sydney Academy here in Sydney. I came to CBU to do my engineering diploma. And then when that was done, I went to Technical University of Nova Scotia, which is now Dal. I'll get it with Dal to finish my engineering degree. And then when I finished my engineering degree, I'd met my wife through school. Like many people in Nova Scotia, had to leave to find work. So traveled overseas a bit on some contracts at some universities, but then eventually landed in Toronto. Right? It's either Toronto or West. And I worked for I was an electrical engineer then, a manufacturer it was IBM/Celestica, where I was a test engineer for a number of years. And then I decided to go back and pursue a graduate degree, a master's at the University of Toronto, which I did. And then after that, I was about to do my PhD, and my supervisor said, "Come join me at this startup where you're going to make $1 gajillion." And so I left my master's. I finished my master's and went and did that. And the startup did not pay us for a few months, and there was some ups and downs. And I stayed there for a while, did not make $1 gajillion, but then moved on to work for a lot of other great places. I worked at BlackBerry, lived in China for a number of years, doing BlackBerry development and program management. Worked at Kobo Books, a Canadian e-reader company, Rogers, which many people know about. And then eventually I moved into education. A friend of mine asked me to develop a course in cybersecurity because I was sort of in that space. This is really the pre-AI days. And then I developed that course, started teaching it part-time, and just fell in love with that part of, being able to be with the students and to take all those years of experience and share them and relate them to what they were doing. It just felt like a gift to have that opportunity. And then I moved into education, and now I sit in the role of associate dean at Humber Polytechnic, and I manage a cluster of programs that include AI, cybersecurity, IT programming, and sort of the traditional computer science type disciplines. And I've never been happier.
That's quite a resume. You've gone from soup to nuts. Everything starts at Sydney Academy through CBU and probably UCCB back in the day. Then
it was UCCB back then,
and you've had a lot of exposure in industry.
Yeah.
So that gives you a bit of perspective, both from the occupational side and in your current role in education. And you're often called to sort of give your opinion and update the public through CBC and your interviews with them. So. I'm excited to learn what your first experience with AI was. Like when did AI first hit your radar?
Yeah, so it was around 2022 when we all started to hear about. So I had known about AI. I had a number of professors that were doing what I would consider pure research in that space, right? And what we call machine learning. Like AI really started with being able to look at images. Right? That was where it really became superpowered, and people started using these chips to do that work that were used in gaming machines, these graphical processing units. And so that's where I initially had experience, but it was really in 2022 when ChatGPT came online, which is that tool that everybody probably knows about now, made by OpenAI. That's this massive company now. It came online, and then students in education and professors and everybody started using it. And that was, a large language learning model platform where you could, ask it questions and it could give responses and then eventually do things like draft essays and emails for you. And it was transformative. And I started playing with it then. And then, now I use ChatGPT, Claude, many other platforms in my daily life. if for no other reason to ensure that what I'm doing is consistent with what other people are seeing, and making sure that I'm not missing something.
So, like everyone else, ChatGPT was sort of your first modern experience with that, and I find that whole process, the cat was out of the bag before anybody knew it. I think we were seeing, I think we were seeing students using ChatGPT and professors trying to catch up with, with the technology and what was going on. The first experiences in that time with students using ChatGPT, maybe you could elaborate on that a little bit. How do you think that rolled out?
It was shocking. Ultimately, I think professors, administrators all across Canada and across the world didn't know what to do with it, because here you develop this tool that can write an essay, and it can avoid any sort of checkers of cheating, right? As we used to call it, cheating. Or if you're a professor in technology, it could write a whole program that works and compiles out of the box. And so what that meant is that any traditional assessment that people were using that involved things like multiple choice, or creating some sort of solution that had sort of limited possible outcomes, right? Like maybe one of 5 right answers, that AI tool could do in a heartbeat. And so it really forced everybody to think about what assessments really, really look like. And the initial reaction, I think all across Canada and the world, was to come out and try to ban those tools. And I think the culture and the mindset is starting to change, because it's like the calculator. Once the calculator came online and I did my engineering diploma here at CBU, I was not, or UCCB back in the day, I was not allowed to use my scientific calculator during my exams. And now all students use them, right? So that's the kind of moment that we're having. And and I think most education systems are still trying to catch up and trying to figure out how to change those assessments, because when you have a large number of students in a classroom and you have to assess their skills, it's very difficult to do it in a way where you can have a conversation with every single student individually. The numbers just don't support that. And so unfortunately, the types of assessments that we often have to use to accommodate that are the ones that those tools like ChatGPT can do quite well.
Yeah. So the students really did catch on to this before professors, the academic staff did, and there was a bit of catching up that I think needed to be made. Where do you think we are now? Like, if this is, say, 2.5, 3 years in, and everyone's had at least a chance to form an initial opinion and digest some of what's gone on, where do you think we are now in general with AI in the academic sphere?
Mm-hmm. I think it depends on where you are in Canada in terms of what institution you're at. I would say most institutions are developing, if not have developed, an AI strategy that incorporates AI into teaching and learning across the board. I know at the institution that I call home, Humber, that's part of what we do. In fact, when you incorporate AI, the intention is not to do it in a new program that's called AI. It's supposed to be everywhere. It's supposed to be in the programs that are, the MBA programs. It's supposed to be in the social service worker programs, or the social work programs, in the math degrees or the English degrees. The expectation is that the professors are learning how to use AI and ensuring that they're almost at the same level as the students, because the students are always going to be a bit ahead here, so that they can support how the students might incorporate that in the classroom. And in fact, in many places, what we're seeing, or we're hoping to see, is that when students submit their work, just like if you submitted a draft of an essay and you show how you develop those ideas, you're now being expected at many places to show how you've used AI to scaffold and to build on those ideas. And so that's the hope. It's not everywhere. I think there's still some fear and nervousness about how to do that. But the bottom line is that the students are using it. Whether or not we say they should be using it or not using it, they are. Because when students are stressed, right? Maybe many students are working, taking care of family at home, doing lots of things that make it difficult for them to be successful, and they have a tool there that can help them be successful. well, we're doing them a disservice if we don't show them how to use that to be successful. And not only that, but we want to make sure that when they use it, that they're still doing things like critical thinking, systems thinking, that relational knowledge that you just can't get out of that tool. So we're doing them a disservice, and we're putting them at a disadvantage when they graduate compared to many other places around the world, I think.
That's interesting. You're saying that we're acknowledging the technology, and students are asked to identify where they've used AI and where they've applied their own critical thinking, and we're embedding that in across the institution, across all programs. So that's an interesting transformation. How do you think the academic staff is collectively? You've had chances to view this at different institutions, I'm sure, across the province. I know you traveled internationally talking about some of this. How do you think that has been accepted or is evolving within the academic staff?
It's stressful, I think, for many people, whether you're academic or admin, right, or support staff in any organization. Because I think if you're a professor, right, for the longest time, you were the knowledge keeper, right? And then along came YouTube, and then students started using YouTube. Even when I was teaching, right, in the later years, people started, using YouTube, and they would ask me questions in the classroom that they saw on YouTube. Well, now it's that next level beyond that, where students have tools that in some cases have more knowledge or a better understanding or a different understanding than the professor does. And so that makes it very difficult for the professor. If they're no longer the knowledge keeper, what are they in the classroom, right?
Yeah.
And many exceptional professors, and I'd say most of the professors we have across the country are exceptional, know how to do that. But what they need to do is take that knowledge and relate it to what's happening in the community, what's happening in the students' lives, right? This relational knowledge. And, Indigenous peoples for many, many generations, who have been knowledge keepers and done this storytelling, focus on the relational nature, right? The relation to the environment, the relation to each other. And that's what we need to, I think, transform into as professors and academics, is storytellers, and not just people that hand over knowledge. Gone are the days where you can just put up a PowerPoint slide and assume the student is going to remain engaged, right?
Yeah.
They're living in this world where they're getting these 30-second bite-sized chunks on their phone, right? Nonstop. And so it's difficult, I think, for professors, because no longer are they the only people that have the knowledge, but the way that they have to communicate that knowledge it needs to be different, right?
Yeah.
And I think the days of teaching for 40 minutes, a 40-minute lecture where the student sits there and listens, that's going to change, right? And I think we're going to see things where we have these stand-ups where professors get up for 5 to 10 minutes, do something, right? Talk about it, and then the students go and then do their own work, and maybe they're using ChatGPT in the classroom to try to build and scaffold on that knowledge, and then they're coming back to the professor for the next piece of information. That's an example of this sort of problem-based learning approach that we're starting to see. We're seeing it in Europe first, starting to see it in Canada, but it's flipping the classroom, and that's stressful for anybody.
Yeah. So the transition is underway, whether we like it or not. So we're having to move from the position where we're a knowledge keeper to maybe a knowledge guide or a knowledge navigator.
That's right.
The people that are more successful at doing that are probably going to find themselves more fulfilled in their career because they're probably being more effective at communicating with students. It's interesting you talk about storytelling. I often reference Yuval Harari. He's got a recent book out, Nexus, that's talked about transformations in AI. But he said that about storytelling, and that it is the one thing that differentiates us as an organism, as an animal. We're the only animal that we know of that is able to tell stories. And in fact, we've built our culture and society on it. And one of the cautions that he has is that now with the technology, we've given birth to another intelligence. He calls AI alien intelligence, but another entity that now can start to write stories as well. So there are some cautionary tales out there, and we're starting to get sort of the first feedback in the cognitive development of students and individuals who have been using AI. And some of the early reports aren't great, where students are leaning too much on the technology rather than coming up with their own creative content or doing the work for themselves. And there's a progress from the rote style of learning through technology assisted, Google inspired creativity and learning, now through to artificial intelligence, where it's doing much more of the heavy lifting. Do you have any fears in that respect, and the maybe the negative impacts that AI may be having on student populations?
It reminds me of a report out of Australia from a university where they had accused thousands of people of cheating, right? And then they went back and they realized, well, that the software that they were using was flawed, and those students, in fact, weren't cheating. But what I think it really speaks to is the fact that a lot of students are using AI to start that idea generation. They're bouncing their ideas off of it. And when you think about AI is taking the ways of knowing, being, and doing, you're uploading that to the cloud, and then it's taking that apart, it's segmenting it, breaking it into bite-sized chunks. And then when you ask it questions, it's packaging it all back together, but in ways that are simplified and pretty much the same. And so what we're seeing is that as students use these tools, or at least a lot of these are my opinions and my ideas, not necessarily mine and my institution, but when it's putting those things back together, they kind of look the same student to student to student. And so I think the risk is that if the students don't know how to use these tools well in the beginning and in that idea formation, that a lot of the output that they provide is going to look the same compared to their peer. So we're going to lose that creativity element. And I think we're starting to see that with AI tools. And the risk is that these are the days where students are using it and playing with it. And really, it's sort of that there's a lot of uncertainty. But in 5 years, those students are going to be our doctors, right? Or our lawyers, right? I mean, CBU has a medical school here. And I would imagine many of those students check their answers using ChatGPT. I would, right? Because you want to make sure that what you're doing is right. Well, that tool is providing some sort of guidance. And if that guidance is very narrow and based on, a set of rules that somebody in Silicon Valley decides, it's not going to necessarily be creative. It's not going to necessarily represent you or your community or your family, and that's the risk, I think, with some of these tools, especially if we rely on them too heavily.
Yeah. You bring up a couple of good points there. Maybe I can ask you about. It's a bit of a cold war. It's a bit of a fight between people that are actively using AI efficiently, and perhaps students who aren't using AI. They have to graduate university and head off into the real world. There would potentially be an advantage for someone who effectively uses modern tools a little more effectively. So there is that pressure. What do you think about the messaging with students that are told or warned against using AI for academic purposes, but then find themselves in the real world where they're looking for a job where they're expected to perform and they're expected to be efficient and they're expected to have high output? What kind of landscape does that look like for a student going through the process and graduating into the real world?
So I say, and many other people say, that it's not AI that's going to take your job. It's somebody that knows how to use AI that might. And that's the real message here, is that I think Canada has one of the lowest digital literacy rates when it comes to AI around the world, right, around developed countries. And that's a problem, because our students that graduate are going to be competing with everybody else in the world. And the companies that they work for in Canada want to compete globally as well. And in order to do that, they need to be efficient and productive, right? We hear a lot about productivity crisis in Canada. Whether you believe that or not believe that, the bottom line is that companies are always looking for ways to be more efficient. And so it's the people that come into those jobs, especially those entry-level jobs. It's an opportunity for our students, right? If they know how to use these AI tools, right? Just a little bit, then that can provide them a competitive edge,
Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
in those companies, and actually allow them to eventually grow into, these middle management positions over time that we so desperately need them to. There's a lot of talk about how AI is minimizing those entry-level jobs. What we've referred to previously, or Jeffrey Hinton, who's there affectionately known as the godfather of AI, refers them as mundane intellectual labor jobs. Those are the jobs that are first at risk. And so you think about the people that their job is just to do the administrative work in the company and not necessarily to engage or talk with somebody, and just, basically the paperwork every single day. Those are the ones that are at risk. And so if you're graduating a student that eventually goes in to become, say, a paralegal, right? I don't even know if CBU has a paralegal program, but if they become a paralegal and they don't use AI, well, then when that lawyer or that law firm is looking to make the company more efficient, well, they're going to want somebody that knows how to use AI because everybody's telling them that that's the path forward. So I think there's a huge risk if our students aren't trained on how to use these tools properly. And it's a bit of a mess now. We don't really know how to implement them and manage them in the classroom. It's not going to be like that forever. We're in a transformation moment. 2, 3, 4 years, there's going to be tools that are given to universities and hopefully Canadian-based tools that are going to help us to work with our students better and easier. So right now it's a little bit of a scary time, but what I do know is if we're not helping the students learn AI, we're making it more difficult when they transition to the workforce.
Yeah, yeah. If I take that same theme and I zoom the lens back a little bit, and I look at the international scope of artificial intelligence, China's got DeepSeek. The US has several different platforms, several different projects inspired by large multinational corporations, IT companies. Europe, I think, is working on something. Where's Canada in that landscape? Are we... I think yesterday I saw something in the news where NVIDIA was going to be partnering with, I don't know if it was the Pentagon or someone within the government, to create a version of artificial intelligence or a platform that was going to be restricted to Americans or restricted to U.S. use. Where does Canada find ourselves, or where do we as Canadians find ourselves in that landscape? Are we going to continue to be clients of U.S. companies, or is there any effort to develop something of our own that might position us in the globe to compete more effectively?
It's complicated. And I think the short answer, I'll start with the short answer and then the more comprehensive answer, is that we're fast followers. And what I mean by that, traditionally with the digital landscape, is that we don't necessarily compete with the US, but we often do what Europe is doing. Right? And we're seeing the same kind of thing here. Europe has come out and heavily regulated. They have the AI Data Act, where they regulate how AI is used in ways that are great. Like if, for example, you use Facebook and you get kicked off the Facebook platform because they think you've done something wrong. Well, in Canada, if you appeal that, it's likely an AI bot that kicks you off, and it's likely an AI bot that will make that decision. In Europe, it's not like that. And you might not know if it's AI that's doing that to you or not in Canada, and you have no rights around that. Whereas in Europe, if that happens to you, you have the right to say, was that AI that did that to me? And they have to tell you. And then you can ask to be, connected with a human, which you have the right to do. So that's kind of where Canada will eventually go. But right now, Canada and Minister Solomon, who I met and spoke with, is heavily focused on the innovation and the technology leading piece. Canada has built a task force of 26 individuals from big tech and big universities that are very much focused on how Canada can compete from that sort of bleeding edge innovation piece. That's exciting and great. And Canada has a $700 million compute strategy where they're going to potentially build data centers across the country. But the problem with that approach is that an AI data center is $1 billion to build now. It's incredibly expensive. And for us to compete at that level is going to be incredibly difficult. And so I think where Canada's competitive edge can be is in places like CBU, in our institutions that are exceptional institutions all across the country, in that local innovation, right? I think it's going to be very difficult for us to build the next ChatGPT that takes over the world, right? We just don't have the money or the resources. I worked at BlackBerry for many, many years, and in the end, it was difficult for BlackBerry, or RIM as it was called back then, to compete with Silicon Valley. It's not that different with AI. So I think what we can do is we can focus on the ethics and the regulatory piece and how we use AI. And that's why it's important for us to figure out how to use that in the classroom, because what we do, I know, can be implemented and discussed and used internationally, number one. But then there's a lot of local innovation. Like, for example, in Nova Scotia, how do we use AI with the fisheries or with shipping, right? Out west, how do you use AI to combat forest fires? Or there's already some innovative companies out there working with colleges and universities to implement AI into drones that can fly over forest fires, right? And there's students heavily engaged in that. In Toronto, we're doing a lot of work with healthcare and with manufacturing. How can you use AI in the doctor's office in a way that doesn't require you to buy a platform from the United States? Because that's ultimately what we're talking about. If we don't come up with these innovations in Canada, we may still be using the base platform like ChatGPT, but we can be buying software that's Canadian grown on top of that, right? And that's a real opportunity for us. And I don't think that opportunity will last a long time. It'll be, 5 to 10 years. And then the market will get saturated, just like, it did with search engines, right? Google came along and everybody uses Google. There's going to be 3 or 4 or 5 platforms that everybody starts to use. And so it's an exciting time, but there's also a lot of uncertainty, right? And I hope that the federal government really is able to focus on the things that help Canadians, and help Canadians to make sure that they can be resilient through this transition with AI and with jobs. Because, we're seeing those changes happen, at institutions across the country, whether it's, universities, colleges, private, public institutions. AI is creeping in. And people are not only worried about what it means academically, but what does it mean for their jobs?
Yeah, for sure. So if I'm hearing that right, what you're saying is that what we should be looking for are Canada's opportunities, identifying local, regional, Canadian problems, and being the first and the best in the space to be adopting AI in order to come up with solutions for people that address what we do day to day, or address the needs of Canadians or Nova Scotians or Cape Bretoners. And therein we should be probably focusing some of our attention. I mean, as an academic institution, we should be leading in the areas of problem solving and research and finding solutions to these problems. If I could circle back around a little bit about you mentioned rights, people's rights to privacy, people's rights to their content. One of the complaints, one of the accusations maybe that I hear thrown against artificial intelligence is that it relies, or it learns from a body of knowledge that exists in the world, and it doesn't necessarily have permission or the rights to be accessing and learning from. So I hear that a lot from people that are object to AI's encroachment in academia. How do you feel about the issues of these rights, or maybe privacy? Where are we going on that front?
Yeah, I think it's one of the biggest problems, because I think what's happening is that these tools, we're giving our data to these tools for free, right? We're posting it on the internet, or uploading it to social media, or we're typing it into ChatGPT or whatever other Bing AI or whatever it is. In some cases, we're paying for those platforms. Right? So not only are we giving it to free, but we're paying them to take our data. And then they're taking that and they're creating tools and they're selling that back to our employers, right? That they're potentially then using, which, is to change how the workplace looks, right? Maybe for your better, or maybe not for your, that's in your best interest. And so it's scary when you think about that. And you think about, well, why when, if I upload all my medical information to the cloud, who owns that data? And where does that data live? Does that data live here in Nova Scotia? Does that data live in Canada? Or maybe that data lives in a server in the United States or the Philippines. What control do I have, right? And so no longer are we just uploading the data that is our social insurance number, which you should always be careful about, your birth date, where you live, what your kids' names are, but you're uploading potentially data about your heart, right? About what you're thinking. Many of our young people are using chatbots now as pseudo-therapists, right? And there's a lot we can talk about there. But we're using these platforms in ways that we've never used technology for, and uploading the way, not just the ways of knowing, but the ways of being to these platforms. And then to your point, who owns that data, right? What are the privacy issues? And that's a big area of concern. In Europe, they've really pushed the law and identified areas that they deem very critical and that you have to be very careful with AI. You may or may not even be allowed to use AI. And one example is hiring, right? And this is where many of our young people are seeing the impacts right now. When you go and apply for a job, right, after you graduate, often the application that you put in, especially if it's an online application, there could be 2,000 or 3,000 people that have applied for that same job in just 2 to 3 hours. So if you're a hiring manager, how do you go through all those resumes? And how do you identify who's best, who's the right fit? You can't. And so what you do and what companies are doing all around the world is turning to AI to do that filtering, right? And so that's risky because if we're using tools that, we have no control over the rules in those tools, right? What looks like a good fit, is equity, diversity, and inclusion a factor in those decisions? How do you know that I'm being treated properly? Or if you're a parent, your child's being treated properly? You don't. And so I think that's what Europe is doing, is they're identifying critical areas and they're very closely managing that. You think defense, you think other areas like that. Canada's not quite there yet. I know Minister Stallman is looking at that. And I hope we'll have something in place in the next 1 to 2 years. But you have to, because you can't just assume, these companies, maybe they're altruistic goals, like they're good people and they want to do what's right for society. But ultimately, they have shareholders that want to make money. So their number one goal is to make money for them, right? So everything they do is through that lens. And it's not, their first priority is not necessarily the benefit of the people in Canada.
Yeah. So, as consumers of this technology, we're both paying for it and we're training it. So we're providing value, feeding back into the system. And as you ended off saying there, the wealth creation in this process is not necessarily being made in Canada, or definitely not regionally or locally. So we run the risk of having these decisions, or these big decisions, being made for us by nameless, faceless corporations. There are real fears here. And if we do sort of look into that potentially dystopian future that a lot of people are pointing to, even people like Elon Musk and Yuval Harari themselves, they're very wary of where the technology may take us if it starts making the decisions for us. And history kind of proves that technology marches on. So, are there any fears in that for academic institutions where, not just say outside of employment, but are there any fears for other things that AI could be taking over and starting to replace staff, people, decision making?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think every institution will be looking at how to incorporate AI, and hopefully any decisions that are made are focused on how we can provide better services and support to students with the same people and not less. It'll be an institution by institution decision. But an example that I like to talk about is the federal government is looking at talking about austerity and how they're going to use AI to provide better services to Canada. And if you are, a Canadian or filing your taxes in Canada and you call CRA, Canadian Revenue Agency, it's very difficult to get a hold of anybody, probably within an hour, if at all. Sometimes you don't even get put on a queue. And what AI can do is AI can work in the background on that paperwork piece and allow the agent to talk to you within 30 seconds, right? Which would be a nice change, right? If AI can do that stuff in the background, and with the same amount of people provide better service to Canadians, well, that would be a win. And that would allow AI, I think, to be more empathetic and actually provide, that type of future that we all hope to have with AI. But there's a risk that doesn't happen, right? There's a risk that these tools are put in place and they make the engagement with your institutions colder. And we definitely don't want that, especially with our academic institutions, because with these developing, growing minds, we want to make sure that these students are positioned to be as successful as they can be when they finish, so they can compete with the world. So yeah, so I think there's fear that as people in organizations incorporate these tools, that they're not going to be done in the best interest of employees. But that's why talking about it is so important. If we have to talk about it and think about how we can use AI in our daily lives, so that we have the language and maybe in the classroom. So when these decisions or these roundtables happen, we have examples, right? We all talk about bringing lived experience into the classroom, or we want the students to bring those examples because that enriches the conversation. And I think for us as academics, we need to do the same thing. We need to play with these tools. We need to figure out how our students are using them, because when those decisions are made, you want the decisions not to be advice just from the big tech into the institution that says, do this and your world is going to be better. And maybe you can reduce the staff. You don't want to necessarily have that happen. You want to have sort of that bottom-up view that this is how it's working for our students. This is where we can make the experience better. And maybe this is how we can get more students in the door, right? Because I think the institutions that figure out how to incorporate AI well, right? And once that gets known, right, those are the institutions that are going to have more students lining up. Because ultimately, what we all want is we want, to have an exceptional student body that goes and graduates and does exceptional things in the world, right? And has exceptional lives. And that's the opportunity, but it's not easy. So yeah, I understand the fear, and it's an institution by institution decision, but it's not necessarily a done deal.
Yeah. So part of the role as this new knowledge navigator that academic staff are called to be, it's not just managing the situation in the classroom, but looking overall at the institution and thinking about how can we use the technology to make the student experience better? Because it's in our best interest to make sure that the institution provides the best value in a competitive landscape. There's all kinds of universities in Nova Scotia, especially, and there's a lot of choices, in education that people are presented with now. So the people that better use the technology and better serve the ultimate purpose of the institution to instruct, train, prepare students for their future lives. It's important that we take part in that and help to guide those decisions so they aren't being made by someone at the top or arbitrarily by a tech company.
And to your point earlier, AI is coming.
AI is coming.
So we have to embrace it, and we have to figure out what it means for us and our practice at work.
Yeah. One of the things I lament about technology, and you can point to just about anything, any kind of new technology that's been adopted, is that our viewpoint from where we are now is not broad enough to really understand what's going to happen in the future. And I saw a photograph of New York in 1900 and a photograph of New York in 1910. Photograph in 1900 was full of horses. The streets were all replete with horses. And then 10 years later, you couldn't find a horse. It was all cars. The telephone, the comment at the time when it was invented was that it was a great invention and every city was going to have one. So we very rarely have very much in the way of accurate foresight. But given that, if you were to project into the future in, let's say, 5 years, I don't want to go too far into the future, but if you could build an ideal scenario in how universities, post-secondary institutions are adopting this technology, what's some of the low-hanging fruit? What are the things that we could be doing in the short term? 5 years is a pretty short period of time. What are some of the things we could be doing in the short term in order to take advantage of the technology now to improve student experience and the academic environment?
In our post-secondary institutions, we have a lot of data about our students, right? Where they live, sometimes when they're coming to class, maybe where they're shopping, if they're buying a coffee. And a lot of, we talk about how we track data, and that's not great sometimes. But in this situation, we have the opportunity to watch and look for signs of students not doing well, right? Those early warning signs that we can help them. Because by the time the students do the midterm, and they may do well in the midterm or they may not do well in the midterm, we probably could find out earlier on that they're on the path to not being successful and maybe help them. And so what I think AI can do is AI can help us to put sensors across the institution that can support the student engagement, right? So both from a, I'm not being successful, and maybe you can deploy somebody like a student success or advisor person to help, or maybe you can help students even learn more, right? Because, you could in the future, in 5 years, instead of just having the student have to wait to come to class to figure out how to get, the answer to that burning question they have, maybe the AI platform they can ask through some sort of chatbot, and it can automatically serve up the next lesson or part of that next lesson for the students. So I think it can become this tool that can help identify students that need more support and provide those supports for them with these sensors, but also enrich the learning for students that want to go in a different direction, right? And not have to wait for the classroom experience. So I think that's exciting. And I think there's many companies out there that are selling platforms like this. I know of a few that I've engaged with. And then the other thing is the teaching and learning, I think, will change. And I think what I've visited a number of universities in Europe and seen some of the work that they're doing. And in some cases, what they do is they will have a 10-minute stand-up with students where they'll sit together and talk about an idea. And then the students will go off and do some work independently. Well, with AI, they can do that. And you can imagine a scenario where you have 30, 40, 100 students in the classroom. And instead of lecturing to those 100 students for 15 minutes or 3 hours, maybe you're lecturing to, you're talking to, 15 of them or 20 of them for 10 minutes. Right? And that's a model that we're starting to see that works. And then you're giving them enough work that they can go and then independently work and build those life skills that they need, because we don't just want to graduate students that know how to sit in a classroom and absorb information. We want to have students that can take that information and build it into their own knowledge base and figure out what it means for their lives. So models like that, where we do these bite-sized chunks types learning, I think, we're starting to see that. I suspect in the next 5 years that'll be deployed more across the country. And that would be a positive thing. That's something that's very positive in Europe. And no longer are we going to be able to teach the 45 minutes to 3 hour classes in the same way that we have. And that we know for many, many years that that's not been successful anyway. And then the third piece is the assessment piece, right? The days of doing multiple choice assessments are done. And they were never, they were a good assessment when you had many, many students. And it's difficult to find the time to grade, but they were never ideal assessments for the learners anyway. So I think that's the third piece that's going to change. And in fact, some of the new AI tools promise that you may not even need to do an assessment. If you have a tool where you feel safe, that the student feels safe to engage with, and they're asking questions along the way, the tool in principle could assess where the student is, right? And give them, tell them that they've met that particular competency, and maybe there's not even the need for the grade, because ultimately at the end of the student journey in a particular class, you want to make sure that the students have met all those learning outcomes. And that's all that really matters, right? If it's done well. And so maybe the grades don't even mean anything in 5 years, because these tools can help. And so the professors can focus on the storytelling and the helping the students, retain that knowledge, maybe projects, things like this. And maybe they don't even need to worry about assessments in the end, right? So those are some of the exciting things that I think could happen, that could make the student experience better and potentially make the because I would imagine many academics don't love grading assessments, right? You spend many late nights doing that. And if you could have a tool that could help you with that, that's where AI is not yet, right? Students are already using it. But on the professor side, they're not using it yet to grade the same way.
Yeah. So it does sound like a fundamental paradigm shift. I guess the generations we have coming up now are more accustomed to more personalized service and, getting what they want immediately from Amazon or eBay or Spotify or whatever. And they're coming to our institutions with that kind of background. And it's up to us to meet that expectation in order to be graduating the best students who are in the best position, and understanding that everyone's different and everyone comes in with different life background and capacities. Sort of what you described there a little bit reminds me a little bit of a story I heard about spaghetti sauce.
I like spaghetti.
You like spaghetti? I like spaghetti too. At one point, Prego was a number two spaghetti sauce, and they hired a researcher to look at what they could do to become number one, to make a better spaghetti sauce than Ragu, which was the leader in them. Have you heard this story?
No.
Anyway, this expert.
I'm riveted.
Oh, what's that?
I'm riveted.
Oh, it's interesting because I think it applies here. It all comes back to spaghetti sauce. The expert went off and came back and reported to the board and said, "I'm sorry, there's no such thing as a better spaghetti. There's no such thing as a better spaghetti sauce than Ragu." And they kind of were shocked. He said, "But there are better spaghetti sauces." And what he meant by that is, if you go into the store now, if you go to the store in the 70s, you had Ragu and Prego, two choices. Now you have triple cheese, extra meat, spicy, chunky.
Right.
So you see the proliferation of personalized choices in the marketplace. And the other example I see now is Oreo cookies. An Oreo cookie used to be, 2 pieces of chocolate wafer with a white cream in the middle. Now there's rainbow, now there's white stuff, there's fluffy ones, there's frozen ones, there's coated ones. They've got holiday ones. So we really do live in a world of specialization. It's almost like manufacturing on demand. When someone wants something, you just 3D print it off. Maybe that's what's happening or could be happening if we blue sky this in education. If we look at what artificial intelligence can allow us to do.
Personalize the learning journey.
And personalize the learning journey. At the same time as taking some of the mundane tasks away from the professors.
Yeah.
And making their process a little more fulfilling, rather than going through the rote process of marking papers or correcting multiple choice tests. They can engage in better conversations.
That's what you hope.
If you can prepare the students with the proper preliminary guidance.
And it needs to start at the elementary and the high school level, right? In order for students to do this type of change in how they learn, we'll need to coach them along the way.
And they're expecting this already. I mean, they grow up in a 21st, 22nd century world. Are we in the 21st century? And they come to an educational institution around the globe, and they're presented with an 18th century method of instruction. Right. Of course, they're going to tune out. So we've got better tools available. We should be using them. And artificial intelligence is brand new. We're all at the start. It doesn't matter if you're Harvard or Humber or CBU. Right. We're all at the start.
That's right. And
the race has just begun. And the challenge is for us to apply some creativity that we've talked about the importance of. Apply some of that creativity that we think is so important, and look at how we can rethink the classroom. Yeah.
And I think professors need to be reassured that they're the experts in teaching and learning, and it's okay to play with new tools. It's an exciting thing. If you take this into the classroom, and sure, there's a little bit of risk that it's going to go well or not well, but the opportunity is so huge that why not try? You already know how to best engage the students, right? You've been doing it for many years, many of the people that are probably listening. So why not play with it, right? We encourage our students to try new things out. Yeah. I would, I think the same for any academic that's in the classroom. Yeah.
And to reach back to something you said earlier, the challenge is not necessarily developing the AI platform, but looking at the implementation that we can use it for and being the best at that. So, from a researcher's point of view, from an academic's point of view, there's a whole brand new world of opportunity opening up in which the race has just started. And if you can imagine a what if scenario, we potentially have the chance to be the leaders in that what if situation.
And I think CBU has such a diverse base of students from both from Nova Scotia and Canada and around the world, that there's a lot of talent, both in the student body and the academic body and the administrative body and the support staff, that you already have all the ingredients to do something exceptional. Yeah. Right? You just need the opportunity.
Yeah. Well, I think the opportunity is presenting itself. We just have to pick up the torch.
Yeah.
Thank you for the discussion. This has been enlightening.
I'm so happy to come home and do this with you. Thank you for having me.
Great. Thanks.